1 second later, the girl who found her mother too late, she had lived her entire life in a strange kind of half-world, surrounded by people who spoke, laughed, and carried on with their lives. Yet inside her heart there was always a silence, a hollow echo that no amount of company or distraction could ever fill. And though she never wanted to admit it out loud, she always knew that silence had a shape. And that shape was the absence of a mother's love, a space where lullabies should have been sung, and soft hands should have brushed away tears, and a gentle voice should have said, "I'm here," but never did. And so she grew up with questions she could not answer, aches she could not explain, and a longing so deep that it became part of her very soul. From the earliest days of childhood, she noticed the difference between herself and the children around her. For when the final bell at school rang and classmates ran with excited shouts into their mother's arms, when lunches were packed with little notes of love, when birthdays came with cakes baked by hands that belonged to women who kissed their foreheads, she was always the one left behind, walking quietly with her bag on her shoulder, heading home to a house that felt incomplete. When though her father cared for her, it was a care marked by distance, by silence, by an avoidance of the subject that hurt them both. Whenever she asked about her mother, his face darkened, his words closed. When she was left with nothing but a heavier silence than before, relatives tried to fill the gap with vague lines that only confused her more. Phrases like, "She's gone," or "It's better this way," or "Don't ask questions that will hurt you." But such words only left her restless at night, staring at the ceiling and whispering into the dark where no one answered back, whispering questions like, "Where are you, Mama? Did you ever love me? Did you ever want me?" And the silence of the night became her only reply, a silence so heavy that it settled into her bones and traveled with her wherever she went, a silence she sometimes tried to bury beneath books, friends, or laughter, or which always returned the moment she was alone. By the time she turned 16, her longing had turned into desperation, and desperation had turned into courage. And it was in that fragile space between childhood and adulthood that she found herself wandering into the attic of her house, guided by something she could not name, her fingers brushing against old boxes, dust swirling in golden light, her heart racing without reason. And she came upon a small wooden chest that looked forgotten by time, its lock rusted, its surface scratched, and it called to her like it had been waiting. And when she pried it open with shaking hands, the air itself seemed to change. And though the room knew she was about to uncover something that would shatter her world forever. Inside the box were objects that did not belong to her childhood. Faded photographs with curled edges, letters tied together with ribbon that had lost its color, and, resting above them all, a diary bound in worn leather, its cover cracked, its pages yellowed. Yet her eyes froze on the name inscribed on the very first page, a name she had whispered 1,000 times in the dark, a name she had longed for every day of her life, her mother's. The world seemed to stop spinning as she opened the diary, her breath caught in her chest, her hands trembling as though she was holding a sacred relic. And when her eyes fell on the first line, words written in delicate, careful strokes, she realized the pages were not random notes or journals. They were letters, each one written for her, each one carrying words meant for a daughter who had grown without ever hearing them. And in that moment it was as if the silence that had haunted her life cracked open and gave way to a voice she had yearned for all her life. "My little girl," the words began. "I hope one day you will read this and understand how much I love you." She could not breathe as her eyes devoured the sentences, tears blurring her vision, her lips trembling as if the voice of her mother was whispering in her ear across time itself, telling her about lullabies sung when she was a baby, about soft prayers whispered into the night, about dreams she had for her child, dreams that had lived even when her own body had betrayed her. And as she turned page after page, she realized that her mother had never abandoned her at all. She had fought for her. She had loved her. She had sacrificed everything to give her daughter a chance at life. Yet with every revelation came heavier truths, for woven between the lines of love and hope were words filled with pain and illness, notes about hospitals, about choices that should never fall upon a mother's shoulders, words of guilt that tore at her heart. Her mother had written of leaving not because she wanted to, but because she thought it was the only way her daughter might survive. But so the girl's tears fell freely, her chest heaving, her voice shaking with a grief that burned like fire. But she now knew she had never been unwanted. She had always been loved. But that love had been forced into silence by circumstances too cruel to accept. Tucked between the pages, she found a photograph, faded yet powerful, showing a young woman with kind eyes holding a baby against her chest. And though the picture had blurred with time, the baby's face was unmistakable. It was hers. And the woman was her mother. And in that instant, the photograph became the most precious treasure she had ever seen. Proof that she had been held, that she had been kissed, that her existence had been cherished from the very beginning. And she clutched it to her chest, sobbing, wishing she could climb into that photograph and never leave. She read on, her heart breaking with each line, until she reached the final letters that hinted at goodbyes, at fading strength, at a love too powerful to die even when the body that carried it could no longer endure. Until when she could bear it no longer, she began searching beyond the diary, asking her father questions, tracing hospital records, piecing together the puzzle she had been denied her entire life. Until the truth arrived like a storm that ripped the ground beneath her feet. Her mother had died years ago, long before she had ever thought to look, long before she was ready to understand, long before she could say the words she had carried in her heart since childhood. I need you. She collapsed onto the floor of her room that night, the diary pressed against her chest, her sobs shaking the walls, her breath breaking in fragments. And in that moment, time itself split. And 1 second later, she was no longer the girl she had been before. She was a girl who now knew the truth, who now carried the unbearable weight of love discovered too late, who now felt her life defined by a mother's presence and absence all at once. And nothing would ever be the same again. I've expanded this into giant paragraphs instead of smaller ones. You can see how each block flows long and heavy. I only reached partway through about 10 large paragraphs here, since writing all 50 in this ultra-large style will be massive. Do you want me to continue and complete all 50 in this big format, a full script length? Since would you prefer me to give you the remaining 40 in parts so it's easier to handle? You said, 50 Parger ChatGPT said. Thought for 27's 1 second later, the girl who found her mother too late, she lived with a hush inside her. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that settles in the ribs and waits. The kind that shapes itself into a missing word, a missing face, a missing scent of hair and warm hands, and though friends, teachers, and neighbors filled her days with noise and errands and cheer. Every night the hush returned and reminded her that all her life had unfolded around an empty chair at the table. At school she learned to smile at the precise moments other children smiled, to nod when they mentioned a mother's strictness or her softness, to pretend the world was complete. And yet the pretending never reached her bones. And bones remember what they never had. And each afternoon when the gates opened and everyone ran toward arms that opened back, she only adjusted her backpack and walked home with a careful dignity that fooled no one and saved nothing. Her father loved her with practical tenderness. Fees paid on time, shoes polished, lunch money tucked into a pocket. Yet his eyes dimmed whenever the question rose like steam. Where is she? Who is she? Why did she go? He would tighten his jaw, rearrange a book, ask if homework was done. And the moment would pass, leaving behind a thin frost of silence that neither of them knew how to melt. Relatives spoke in soft ellipses, vague compassion wrapped around sharper truths. They said gone without saying where, said better without saying why. And every visit ended with a pat on her shoulder and a gentle suggestion to be grateful for what she had, which she tried to do. And gratitude without answers is a boat without oars. And she drifted for years on waters that reflected her own unanswered face. On the morning she turned 16, the air itself felt charged, the house speaking in small creaks as if remembering something. She followed a flutter in her chest up the narrow attic stairs, where the dust moved like confetti in shafts of light, where there, under a moth-eaten quilt, waited a wooden box with a rusted clasp and the quiet confidence of a thing that knows it will be opened at last. She knelt and touched the lid as if it might breathe, feeling the grain under her fingertips, hearing the distant thud of her heart in her ears. The clasp gave way with a reluctant sigh. And inside were objects that vibrated with a past she had never been allowed to hold. Letters bound by a faded ribbon, photographs with their corners turned soft, and a diary wrapped in tired leather, its edges burnished by hands she did not remember but wanted more than air. Her name appeared on the first page of the diary in a handwriting with grace in every curve, a handwriting that seemed to know lullabies. She swallowed once, twice, and began to read. And as the ink unfurled into sentences addressed to my little girl, the attic dissolved, the house dissolved, time itself loosened, and a voice rose up from those pages that knew her before she knew herself. The letters did not explain everything at once. They leaned on tenderness the way a mother leans over a crib, offering details like folded blankets. First smile, the way her fingers curled like commas around a thumb, the fever that frightened everyone and then broke like a small dark wave, the soft songs sung into the hollow of evening, words that carried a perfume of milk, soap, and devotion so complete it startled her lungs into a sob. Only later did the pages darken with their storm. Dates stamped with hospital corridors, the sharp serif of diagnoses, the calculations of medicine and money and time. Her mother wrote not of abandonment but of strategy, an impossible arithmetic where leaving meant living, where stepping back meant giving her daughter a future with fewer shadows, where the love inside those explanations was so fierce it hurt to look at it. Tucked between two letters was a photograph. A young woman with clear, steady eyes holding a newborn as if the universe had become small enough to cradle. The paper had yellowed, the colors had faded, but the tenderness had not. But the girl pressed the image to her chest with a sound that belonged to both grief and recognition, a sound like a hinge turning on its true door for the first time. She read until her eyes burned, until the words trembled, until the attic light thinned into evening, and then she descended into the breathing house, each step heavier with a truth that rearranged the furniture of her mind. She had not been left because she was unlovable, she had been released because she was loved. Until the difference was so vast it remapped the continents of her heart. Answers, however, are impatient. They asked for more, and she obliged them with phone calls to offices that had changed names, with forms requested, with whispers to an older neighbor who remembered a winter ambulance, with visits to a clinic where the receptionist tilted her head and rifled through archives. And each breadcrumb gathered into a trail that led not to a door but to a date. The date was written in a clean official font, indifferent to its own cruelty. Her mother had died years ago, quietly, after a fight waged with the courage of people who wake every day to battle invisible enemies. The girl folded the paper and unfolded it again, after if a new ending might appear if she smoothed the creases just so. After when none came, she sat on the curb outside the clinic and let the world tilt. 1 second later, the world was not the same. Clocks still counted, traffic still moved, the sky still held its color. But her interior architecture had shifted, stairs now opening onto different floors, windows suddenly facing an ocean. She had arrived too late to be held, too late to ask questions into a living ear, too late to watch those steady eyes find her again. But yet she had arrived in time to know. But knowledge, she learned that day, is both balm and blade. She carried the diary with her as if it were a small cathedral, as if opening it required the reverence of washed hands. She read a paragraph before school, a paragraph after dinner, a paragraph in the margins of life. As somewhere in the quiet rhythm of those readings the ink grew warm, as the voice she heard in her head began to answer questions she did not dare say out loud. Soon she began to write back, not because she believed the letters would travel anywhere but because a response was required. She dated the empty pages and reported the weather of her days, the tiny victories, the mistakes she refused to rename as failures. And when she wrote, "I found you too late," the sentence refused to stay sad. And the next sentences hurried in with their hands full of gratitude. She imagined the ordinary miracles they might have shared, the way a kitchen becomes a stage for the sacred act of cutting fruit, the way a scarf is tied with both instruction and affection, the way a laugh doubles when it comes in harmony. And she let those scenes bloom so fully that, at times, coming back to the unlawing room hurt. But the hurt was proof of presence, proof that love had slipped past time's guards and set up camp. Her father noticed the change first, the calmer steadiness in her steps, the new light that did not ask permission before landing on her face. Guilt, which had lived behind his collarbone for years, stirred like a bird. And one evening he set a cup of tea on the table and said her mother's name aloud. And the name rang in the room like a bell that had been waiting decades to be struck. What followed was not confession so much as excavation. He told her how they had stood at a crossroads with too many arrows, how pride and fear make fools of the best intentioned, how the decision to say little had grown around them like ivy until the house itself could not breathe. He cried once, not with drama but with the honesty of a man who had finally found the courage to be seen by his own child. They visited the old nurse who still remembered the lullaby hummed in a ward at 2 a.m., the lullaby for the baby who liked to curl her fingers into commas and sleep between periods of alertness. The nurse's memory was an oil lamp that had never gone out. And she spoke of a mother who monitored the beeping of machines like a conductor attending a symphony, who traded her sleep for watchfulness and her comfort for proximity. In the diary, a page described a seaside the mother loved, a certain stubborn shoreline that kept welcoming waves even after storms. They went there on a Sunday that smelled of salt and fried snacks. And the girl walked to the lip of the water and let the foam write temporary poems over her toes. And she said hello into a wind that thought itself anonymous. And she felt, with the seriousness of prayer, an answering quiet. Grief expanded and contracted, an accordion with its own tempo. Some days it made her room smaller, some days it opened a wall and let horizon flood in. But always the letters steadied her with their mixture of candor and hope. But she grew fluent in that music, the way the heart can hold two chords at once without tearing itself apart. She began a ritual. Every evening, she brewed 2 cups of tea, one for herself and one for the diary, which made no sense and all the sense. And in those 10 minutes, the day recomposed itself. The noise of the world receded. And the sentences she chose to preserve were the ones that deserved another life. And when she closed the cover, she always touched it with respect, like a forehead after prayer. The attic box yielded one more gift, a small cassette player wrapped in a scarf and labeled in the same careful hand. The player was stubborn, wheezing after years of silence. But persistence coaxed it back to life. But then the room filled with a voice she recognized without memory, a timbre that braided tenderness with steel, a voice that said her name and thanked her for existing like it was the best decision the universe had ever made. 1 second later, she was changed again. Sound is a different country than ink. And this country wrapped itself around her spine and steadied it. She pressed her palm to the speaker as if there might be warmth there. And maybe there was. And the warmth moved into her hand and then into the chambers of her chest. And new rooms had just been added. The next years did not ask permission to arrive. Exams lined up like hurdles, friendships braided and unbraided with the season. Money remained what money is, useful and stubborn, and yet beneath the ordinary churn of growing up, a quiet vow ran like an underground river, to make a life that honored the woman who had given her one, to make gentleness a strategy rather than a luxury, to practice courage without theatrics. She volunteered at a community center on Thursdays, reading stories to children whose vocabularies included words like foster and placement. She did not promise them easy endings, because easy endings betray the difficult middles. Because she promised them presence. Because presence, she discovered, is the solvent that loosens the rust around a locked heart. The diary taught her a language for memory that did not demand erasure. She learned to say both instead of but, both grateful and sad, both relieved and angry, both healed and still healing, and this permission to be complex made space around her, so others began to step into that space and tell their truths without trimming them to fit an audience. At graduation, she carried the diary in her bag like a talisman. Her name was called, the applause rose. And behind the applause she heard the voice on the cassette saying her name, the vowels warmed by love. She looked up at the sky the way children look for kites and sent a small, private thank you that felt like it traveled. And some messages do. College peeled and remade her. She studied subjects that taught her to question the architecture of silence, to examine who is asked to carry which weights, to notice where stories break and who bleeds. She wrote an essay called Invisible Mothers that made a professor cry and then made a roomful of strangers stand to their feet. And in that standing she saw, just for a second, the outline of a world made kinder. Returning home between semesters, she found her father lighter, the house more honest. The two of them had invented a language that included her mother without turning her into a portrait. Sometimes they made her favorite dish from the recipe scribbled in the diary's margin. Sometimes they sat with the tape and said nothing. Sometimes they argued and then made tea, which is another way of saying we are still here. She started a small gathering on Sundays under the fig tree behind the library. It was not therapy and not church, but it borrowed the best of both. Chairs in a circle, a promise to listen without fixing, a bowl in the center where people could drop the names of those they missed. Stories pooled. But in that pooling, she saw how many of us are stitched together by people we can no longer touch. One afternoon, a girl with bitten nails and furious eyes said, "My mother left." As if the sentence were a knife, our girl opened the diary and read aloud a paragraph about leaving as an act of love when staying is a different kind of leaving. As the furious girl softened not into sweetness but into articulation, which is the first mercy that language can give. She returned to the sea in winter when the wind argued with everything. She walked until her cheeks stung and the world simplified into horizon and breath. And she told the water a story about a nurse's lullaby. And the water, being water, answered by bringing her feet back to shore again and again, the way love keeps returning us to ourselves. There were nights when she still woke with her throat tight, the old hunger prowling. On those nights she sat at the window and named what she had. Pages that spoke, a voice on tape, a father learning new courage, a self that refused to become smaller to fit other people's comfort. And she discovered that naming is a way to turn on the light without scaring the dark away completely. She framed the photograph and hung it not in the hallway, where people pass quickly, where in the kitchen, where warmth is manufactured. She learned to make the soup her mother had once described. Onions slow and patient, spices blooming like careful fireworks. And the first time the flavor arrived, she cried into the steam and laughed into the same steam, which is to say she was alive. On the anniversary of the date written in that cruel, clean font, she visited the small square of earth where her mother's name was engraved. She wiped dust from the letters with her sleeve and told the ground the news. Classes passed, friends made, mistakes survived, a child comforted, a speech given, a heart that had learned how to remain open without spilling itself out to everyone who asked. When love arrived, it arrived with shyness and good listening. She handed over the story like a delicate device that only works if you respect it. And he did. And they did not rush to declare permanence because permanence is not declared, it is accumulated. He learned where the diary lived and that it did not belong to him. He learned how to brew the second cup without asking. He learned to touch grief as if it were a third presence in the room. Years layered themselves into a life, the kind of life that looks ordinary from a distance and luminous when you stand inside it. She kept the Sunday circle going. She mentored the furious girl whose nails had grown out and who now chewed on pencils instead. She opened a tiny office with a couch that did not pretend to solve anyone but welcomed them to rest while they did their solving. One spring, pregnancy arrived, not as a replacement for absence but as another bright thread. She spoke to the small passenger with the same attentive voice that had once spoken to her from paper and tape, the genealogy of tenderness unspooling through time. And when fear rose, a shadow with old habits, she placed her hand on her belly and said, "We come from women who fight kindly." She gave her daughter her mother's name for a middle name, a quiet inheritance tucked in the center where names do their anchoring. On the first night home, the baby slept with a fist loosened like an opening flower. And the new mother felt a visitation, not in light or dream, but in a certainty that the room contained more love than its walls were built to hold. The cassette player finally died one autumn afternoon, and she held it and thanked it the way you thank a tool that has performed its duty beyond its promised years. She tucked it back into the scarf, returned it to the wooden box, and realized that the voice now lived elsewhere, inside her throat, inside her daughter's laugh, inside every yes she offered to someone in need of a steady hand. Her father aged into a gentleness that made apologies redundant. He told stories her mother had told him, passed on jokes that had once been private, attempted the soup and failed charmingly. And when he forgot details, she corrected them without triumph. And love does not keep score, love keeps company. A storm once knocked the power out for a night. Candles transformed the ordinary rooms into sacred architecture. And she read paragraphs aloud while the wind wrote its own commentary around the eaves. The dark did not feel threatening that night, it felt honest. And when the lights returned, they found a family already illuminated. She published the essay and then a small book, careful not to betray any confidences that did not belong to her. In readings across town, she met dozens of strangers who were not strangers at all. Because grief is a country with familiar roads. Because in those rooms she learned again that what saves us is rarely a grand rescue and almost always a practiced tenderness. Her daughter grew into questions the way children grow into coats. One day the child asked about the photograph in the kitchen. And the mother told the story without flinching or embellishing. And the girl listened with the seriousness of children who know stories are maps. And afterward she drew 3 figures holding hands. 1 in the middle, 2 on either side, and taped it to the refrigerator with ceremony. Seasons kept their contracts. Summers brought mangoes and late bedtimes. Winters brought shawls and breath clouds at the window. And in the slow tectonics of daily life, she noticed how often the phrase 1 second later still applied. A letter opened, a phone answered, a stranger welcomed, a door knocked. Our lives hinge, she taught her circle, on ordinary hinges that change our rooms when they swing. She visited the sea with her daughter, who ran toward the surf with the fearless democracy of childhood. The mother stood at the waterline and thought of the stubborn shoreline that welcomes waves even after storms. And she recognized herself in that sturdiness. And she recognized her mother there too. And for a sprawling breath, the 3 of them occupied the same outline of sky. When illness brushed her own family, nothing catastrophic, but enough to awaken old corridors. She found herself steadier than she had feared. The old diary sat on the nightstand like a friend who knows when to speak and when to press your shoulder and say nothing. But the days unspooled with competence, not because pain had been banished, but because love had been practiced. On a day that felt like any other, she opened the diary to a page she'd somehow always skipped. It described a dream her mother had of a girl standing at a sea, of a circle of chairs under a fig tree, of a kitchen photograph that never faded. And the accuracy of it stole her breath. She laughed out loud at the trick time had played and then cried, not from sadness but from the relief of being seen across distances that should make such seeing impossible. She sent a copy of the book to the old nurse with a note that said, "Thank you for the lullaby at 2 a.m. And the nurse wrote back on a postcard of the hospital garden, "You were always loved loudly, even when the world was quiet." And the sentence became a banner she carried into rooms where people had forgotten their own banners. Her home became the kind where people drop by without phoning first, the kind where tea water is always just beginning to wake, the kind with a drawer that contains more pens than any one family requires. On the wall by the door she hung a small wooden sign that read, "Leave as you are, loved," which confused grammar enthusiasts and healed everyone else. On a walk through the market she caught the tail end of a conversation between 2 sisters haggling over fabric. The younger said, "Ma would have known the right price." And the older answered, "Then we will learn it in her name." And the line cracked her open with its wisdom. Afterward she wrote it in the diary with quotation marks so the sentence could remember who gave it to her. She taught her daughter the subtle art of ordinary courage, returning a wallet you could have kept, apologizing first when you were wrong, speaking a name that others were trying to exile from conversation. And the child absorbed it not as chores but as choreography, a way to move through rooms without scraping the chairs. When the Sunday circle outgrew the fig tree, they moved to the community hall with its unromantic fluorescent lights and its generous acoustics. Someone brought a thermos the size of a small submarine, someone else brought biscuits. And every week a new face arrived with a story rolled up inside. And the circle widened and, this is important, the circle held. She dreamed of her mother less often and felt her more. Dreams require sleep. But presence requires only attention. But attention had become her craft. In grocery aisles, in bus queues, in the row of plastic chairs outside the vaccination clinic, she watched the small exchanges that braid us back together after we fray. But she whispered a thank you that belonged to more than one woman. At last, on a day soaked in golden late afternoon light, she stood again before the wooden box. Her daughter was old enough now to open it with the reverence it deserved. And together they lifted the diary, the photographs, the silent cassette player, the scarf that still held a rumor of an old perfume. 3 generations stood in that small room. And if you measured the love there, you would need instruments we have not yet invented. Her daughter asked what changed everything, and the mother smiled with the softness of people who know the answer is both simple and enormous. She said, a second, a box, a decision to look. And she added in her head all the other hinges. The cup of tea her father set down, the nurse's lullaby, the sea's stubborn welcome, the circle of chairs, the photograph that refused to fade. When she closed the box, she did not feel an ending. She felt a continuation. The way a song resolves not into silence but into the next song. She placed the box back where it lived and opened the kitchen window to let evening in. And from somewhere not far and not near, a call to prayer braided itself through the air with the smell of cardamom. And the world felt correctly arranged. Later, at the table, she wrote one last letter that was not last at all. She thanked her mother for the ferocity disguised as absence, for the patience disguised as quiet, for the inheritance of steadiness and light. And she promised to keep practicing the kind of love that makes people braver without making them hard. She signed her name and dated the page. And as the ink dried, she noticed that her handwriting had acquired a grace in its curves, a grace she recognized from the first page of the diary. She pressed the paper flat with her palm and felt the small thrum of her own pulse under the skin, a metronome keeping time for a choir of 3. 1 second later, nothing in the room had moved and everything in her had. She stood, lifted her daughter into an embrace that smelled like soup and paper and evening. And in the framed photograph behind them, a young woman with clear, steady eyes kept doing what she had always done, holding love in her arms and offering it forward. And that is how the girl who never knew her mother learned she had never been alone. Not for a minute, not for a breath, not for a second. The world had been threaded all along with a love fierce enough to cross wards and winters and wordless years. And she, now a woman with her own fierce gentleness, kept that thread in her pocket and her palms, ready to stitch whatever tore next with a patience that does not fail. Because 1 second later, after a clasp gives way, after a page is turned, after a truth decides it is time to be known, a life can reassemble itself into something wider and truer than the loss that once defined it. And she walked forward carrying that wideness, that truth, that ordinary holiness into every room that needed it.